Welcome back for another Share Custodian video. Today I'm going to talk about the ERAS death spiral. And I'm really glad that you're here today, ready to hear me talk about this. But if you're not a regular listener, or if you've landed here without watching my last video, you probably want to catch up on that first because it's an important one, and it kind of lays the foundation for what I'm going to discuss today. This is what I talked about last time, ERAS and financial conflict of interest at the AAMC. And I explained how, because of the Electronic Residency Application Service, the AAMC transformed from a nonprofit organization with a relatively simple mission and a sensible budget into a financial behemoth with well over $1/3 billion in net assets and a sprawling portfolio of projects and services. And I went into the nuts and bolts of this business model, and I showed how every year residency applicants applied to more and more programs, spurred on by the AAMC's messaging. And every year, the AAMC raised the price on applying to residency programs, even though there was not really any reasonable justification for doing so other than, wanting more money. Anyhow, I explained all that and a lot of other things too. But the one thing I didn't explain was the title slide itself, which has this picture of a goose laying a golden egg. And this obviously is a reference to the old fairy tale where a farmer has the incredibly good fortune of learning that he has this goose that lays golden eggs, and it makes him rich, but slowly. So instead of managing that steady income stream, he eventually gets greedy and he kills the goose that lays the golden eggs, and he loses everything. So that's the part of the story I'm going to tell today, because I think the AMC is in real trouble. Their leadership foolishly chose to make the organization's financial well-being dependent on a single product. And at the same time, they became very complacent and even willfully negligent in ignoring real problems in that product and in the marketplace in which it's positioned. And collectively, those decisions set in motion a confluence of factors that at the very least is going to upend their business model and cause them to have to make some hard decisions about the services that they provide. And that's what I'm going to explain here in the ERAS death spiral. But let me start here with the AMC's revenue in 2022. What you're looking at is a breakdown of the AMC's revenue sources. And on this pie chart, you can see that half of the AMC's income comes from ERAS. That's that big red slice of the pie here on the bottom. It's the base of the pyramid, the legs of the chair. It's the hull of the boat that's keeping everything afloat. And as I mentioned last time, every dollar that applicants spend on ERAS contributes at least 50 cents to the AMC's other products and services which don't generate any revenue themselves. And this slide, of course, shows you how we got here. This graphic shows the revenue by year of the AAMC's major services, and it shows how ERAS revenue has grown much more rapidly than any of the AAMC's other products. But really what this graphic is showing you is the story of application fever, because in the early days of ERAS, applicants were applying to a fraction of the residency programs to which they apply today. But every year, to gain a relative advantage in a competitive process, applicants have applied to more and more programs. And because the AMC has a tiered fee structure and raised the price just a little every year, this was a great business model. You could count on application fever to increase ERAS revenue every single year. ERAS kept the AMC from having to tighten their belt like a lot of businesses had to during the Great Recession or during the COVID-19 pandemic. Through economic upturns and downturns, ERAS was always there to provide the AMC's leadership with a surplus of revenue to increase their executive compensation and expand the organization's mission. All of this was very good for the AMC. But having ERAS turn into a runaway gravy train, well, that hurt lots of other groups. First and foremost is the applicants who had to subsidize all this corporate growth with their student loans by paying more and more each year just to apply to a job. And it hurt residency programs too, because it was the programs that had to deal with this growing pile of applications, and that task got harder each and every year. And beyond that, it actually hurt medical education at large, because this kind of system in which programs received 100 applications for every position they're trying to fill, well, it naturally leads to an over-reliance on easily filterable metrics. It was application fever that led to our unholy worship of USMLE Step 1 scores and ultimately the decision to move that test scoring to pass-fail. Anyhow, as applicants, program directors, and medical education writ large continued to suffer under the burden of application fever, people began to talk and write about all this. And eventually, that discontent spread and it galvanized into two major changes in the residency application system that, at a bare minimum, are going to significantly reduce the AMC's revenue from ERAS and might realistically result in that service disappearing altogether. The first major change is this: competition. Because now, after over 2 decades of enjoying a near monopoly on the highly lucrative business of selling residency job applications to desperate medical students who need a residency job in order to make the hundreds of thousands of dollars they spend on their undergraduate medical education be the least bit worthwhile, well, now the AMC is going to have to face a serious competitor. In July of 2023, OBGYN announced its plan to stop using ERAS and instead take their business to Liaison International, who had developed a different platform named Residency CAS. I covered all this at the time in a video called The ERAS OBGYN Divorce, if you want more details. I should emphasize, though, that this isn't some kind of money-making scheme for OBGYN programs. Residency programs don't get a dime of the revenue that applicants send to ERAS, and they don't get a dime from whatever applicants are going to spend using Residency CAS either. The OBGYN program directors, they just got fed up with ERAS as a product and with the AMC as a partner. And if you've been following any of this, it's not really very hard to see why. From the late 2000s to 2020, computers got a lot better. I mean, think about how much better your phone is now than it used to be. But this rising tide of human progress in electronics that was lifting ships elsewhere, it didn't really seem to change very much inside ERAS. As a piece of software, ERAS really looked and functioned about the same at the end of the decade as it did at the beginning. And I'm sure the AMC's software engineers, they could point to lots of things that they did behind the scenes, but for those of us who were on the user end, you probably couldn't tell. The ERAS graphical user interface looked about the same. The functionality was usually acceptable, but you could count on ERAS to have unscheduled downtime or to crash altogether during periods of high use, like every year when the opening of the application season came around or during SOAP week. And even for physicians who are inured to using clunky software because of their daily EMR use, if you were using ERAS in 2019 and you were a human being with some experience accessing the World Wide Web in your day-to-day life to accomplish tasks as a citizen in the modern world, well, if you were such a user, then you would not mistake ERAS for being a modern software program. And the AMC was slow to improve. When program directors had ideas about how to improve ERAS, they often got brushed off or told that things that seemed eminently possible would take years to accomplish. And it is true that in the past few years, the ERAS application has been overhauled and improved, and multiple features have been included, like the ERAS supplemental application, which were things that program directors had asked for and wanted. But I'm just explaining to you how this ball got rolling in the first place. So I need also to at least mention the AMC's data sharing or lack thereof. Obviously, ERAS contains a treasure trove of data, and from time to time, many different people wanted the AMC to use that data to solve different problems or to make some aspect of residency selection more equitable or efficient. And it seemed like usually the answer was no. Or maybe it was a yes, but only if you would provide your data to them, and then they would keep all the data and they would do all the analysis themselves. And this was the answer, whether you were a, still wet behind the ears junior faculty member, or someone acting on behalf of a large organization with a long track record of data analysis and data security and a shared incentive of making residency selection work smoothly. And of course, I understand that much of the data in ERAS is very sensitive, and there's legitimate reasons to be careful about who and how it's accessed. But again, I'm just trying to paint the picture about how we got to the point where an entire specialty became willing to invest substantial time and resources to leave ERAS. And I'm not an OBGYN, I clearly can't speak for them, but my impression is that they felt their applicants were suffering because of the AAMC's inertia and unwillingness to innovate or partner with them on solutions for holistic review and addressing application fever. OBGYN applicants are going to start using this new system next year in the 2024-2025 application season. And when they do, they're no longer going to contribute their application fees to the AAMC. How much is that going to hurt? Well, last year there were about 2,600 OBGYN applicants, and depending on their educational background, they submitted on average between 63 and 83 residency applications apiece. So with the current ERAS fee schedule, that would result in $3,362,760 in lost revenue for the AAMC. Now, $3.3 million represents just 2.8% of ERAS revenue. By itself, that doesn't hurt the AAMC that much. I mean, historically, ERAS revenue has grown by much more than that every single year. What scares the AAMC is not that they're going to lose a few OBGYN applicants. It's the idea that more specialties are going to follow OBGYN's lead. Because over the years, a few small specialties have moved in and out of ERAS, but no one has done it as publicly as OBGYN. Because instead of scurrying off with their tail between their legs, OBGYN has made a show of it. They're waving their flag, and they're talking about why they're leaving and how their new system is going to be better. And naturally, the AAMC has completely mishandled this. Instead of just ignoring them and saying nothing, the AAMC has let their fear get the best of their public relations common sense. And instead, they've put out these mopey press releases expressing their concern and dismay. And they've put out messaging to deans and medical schools about how bad this is going to be for applicants. I mean, look, you all hear about stuff like this because you're watching Sheriff of Sodium videos. But the average overworked dean or non-OBGYN program director probably does not give a rip. Word of OBGYN's departure would matter not to them, and they wouldn't have even thought about it until they heard the AAMC pushing back against it. And I honestly don't think that very many, if any, of these folks are going to be convinced to take a stand to protect ERAS revenue. Instead, I think all this talk is just going to make them more curious about the new system. And they're going to start talking about it with other people who are going to get curious about the new system. And the net result is going to be that more specialties are aware of what OBGYN is doing and are more likely to jump ship. If the AMC had just done nothing and just let OBGYN run off and do their own thing, you know what would happen in a few years? They'd be just like ophthalmology or plastic surgery or some other, sort of relatively small, quirky specialty that does things their own way. And the AMC just could have gone back to doing business as usual. But instead, they're turning OBGYN into the Pied Piper, and they're giving him this opportunity to lead away all the other specialties. And if other specialties do leave, that's when things are going to get really interesting. I mentioned before that ERAS is a highly profitable product with at least a 50% profit margin. But it's important to recognize that that margin is dependent on economies of scale. It costs a certain amount to keep the lights on and pay the engineers and keep the servers running. But those costs are about the same whether you have 5,000 applicants or 50,000. Every applicant that leaves ERAS skims a little bit more off of the cream that the AAMC has grown accustomed to keeping for itself. And so the AAMC has responded in other ways to try to improve sentiment about ERAS and try to keep other specialties from leaving. Here's the big one. For the first time, they actually cut ERAS fees. I want to emphasize just how big this is. Like I said before, there has never been a time in all the recorded time of the history of the Electronic Residency Application Service that the AAMC has decreased the price for that service. Never. Not once. Even when revenue was growing by 20% a year, at no point did the AAMC stop and say, you know what, we're good. We're a nonprofit organization, and we're taking in more than we need for ERAS. And golly gee, these applicants just keep applying to more programs every year, so let's just dial it back a little bit. That simply did not occur. In fact, almost every year, ERAS prices increased. $1 here, $1 there. Now, I need to point out, not all nonprofit organizations behave like this. You want a recent example? Take a look at the NRMP. The National Resident Matching Program is an organization that operates on a shoestring budget compared to the AAMC. In 2022, they had revenues that were about 4% of those enjoyed by the AAMC, 11 million to 265 million. And versus that $11.4 million in revenue, they had expenses of 10.7 million. So they had a surplus of $700,000. So you know what they did? They dropped their prices. Here, from July 2022, is the announcement that the match registration fee for applicants would drop from $85 to $70. If you're keeping score at home, that's a 17.6% price drop. Still, the idea that they could reduce their fees seemingly did not occur to the AMC until earlier this month. And curiously, the AMC's announcement came only a week after OBGYN announced the fee structure for residency casts, which would be significantly less than the existing ERAS price structure. I pointed this out on social media as a victory for the free market, an effective competition. And I got a couple of messages telling me, no, the AMC has been working on this for a long time. These two events, they have nothing to do with each other. It is simply a happy coincidence that the AMC announced the first ERAS price decrease ever 1 week after a competitor undercut their prices. This is just a coincidence, folks. Nothing to see here. One person actually told me in confidence the AMC has been working on this for 2 years. And I hardly know what to say about that. I mean, is this that hard of a problem? I mean, the Human Genome Project took 13 years to complete. The Manhattan Project took 3 years. Project Warp Speed gave us a COVID-19 vaccine in under a year. So, 2 years to contemplate how to cut prices for a service with a 50% profit margin. That sounds right. I mean, is that what we think? I got to say also that the timing of this announcement was very unusual in another way that strongly argues against it being anything other than an attempt to wrest the positive narrative away from a competitor, and that's this. For as long as I've been following this kind of stuff, the AMC has always announced the next year's ERAS fee schedule after the completion of the match. And if you think about it, it's kind of obvious why you do that, because if you announce an upcoming change in the middle of an application season, it might cause confusion. And actually, if you were going to lower prices, it might even cause a little bit of anger because the applicants who have already paid the higher price, they may wonder why they couldn't have paid this new lower price. Anyhow, here's the official press release from the AAMC, where President Dr. David Skorton proudly announces the new fee structure without reference to any competitors, but notes that this important update builds on our commitment to supporting learners throughout their journey from pre-med to residency and beyond. Under this new simplified structure, residency applicants will pay $11 per application for up to 30 applications, and a $30 fee for application for 31 or more applications. And he goes on to say that this new fee structure is guided by research and input from the medical education community, learners, and finance experts, and that the change will have a significant impact as we anticipate most applicants will see discounts of up to 36%. I went ahead and graphed out what an applicant would spend to apply to various numbers of residency programs under the different pricing models. The current ERAS fee structure is the red line. The new ERAS fee structure, which supports learners through their journey from pre-med to residency and beyond, is the blue line. And residency CAS, the new OBGYN system, that's the yellow line. So you can see that for any realistic number of applications, residency CAS is slightly less expensive. But like Dr. Skorton told us, most residency applicants using the new ERAS pricing, they're going to see a discount. And if you apply to exactly 30 programs, you will achieve that 36% discount that Dr. Skorton promised. Look at how, although the blue line dips below the red line, especially from 20 to 30 applications, after you hit 30, that blue line starts to rise at a faster rate. And actually, by the time you hit 93 applications, the lines cross, and after that, you're going to pay more under the new ERAS fee structure than the old. And if you watch my last video, you already know who applies to more than 93 residency programs. Yeah, that's right, international medical graduates. So once again, IMGs will disproportionately support the AMC's executive compensation and policy institutes and think tanks with money that they spend on residency applications. It is true that many residency applicants will spend less, And I want you to know that I absolutely think that's a good thing. But I did want to point out that this policy itself is probably more valuable as a PR move than as a way of giving money back to applicants. Here's another example of the same thing. Back in November during their annual meeting, the AAMC announced that they would be providing a 60% discount on ERAS fees to financially needy applicants. And this also was received to great fanfare. And once again, this is a good thing, and I'm all for it. But how good of a thing is it exactly in dollars and cents? Well, not as good as it sounds when you just read the headline. First of all, you can't just apply for the AAMC's fee assistance program when you're in medical school. You have to have already demonstrated your financial need before you entered medical school, back when you were taking the MCAT or applying to medical schools in the first place. So you might wonder how large of a group of medical students that is, and it's probably around 3,000 residency applicants. These are mostly going to be USMD students, but there are some DO students thrown in there and even a few US citizen IMGs. But since non-US citizen IMGs don't take the MCAT or apply to USMD schools, they're not going to qualify. The other thing is that this discount only applies to the first 50 ERAS applications. So under the new ERAS fee schedule, it would cost you $930 to apply to 50 programs, so a 60% discount would save each applicant $558. From the AAMC standpoint, giving 3,000 applicants a $558 discount would cost about $1.6 million. So actually, it would be possible to recover all that revenue if you just convinced every international medical graduate to apply to about 3 more programs on average. If all IMGs applied to just 3 more programs apiece, you could make back that $1.6 million. Or if you don't like that, here's another idea. International medical graduates already have to pay a $165 fee to get an ERAS token. You need this token just to log on to ERAS. So that's a fee before you've even applied to a single program. What actual costs this token covers remain unclear to me. It seems sort of like the resort fee of ERAS. It's a fee that you charge just because you can. I don't think there's actually anything of value that's exchanged for it. Now, this fee goes to the ECFMG, but if the AMC wanted to get a piece of the action and they wanted to create a system in which they charge, say, $90 for ERAS token validation or something like that, well, they could get their money back that way too. But let me get back to my point, which is this. OBGYN leaving ERAS threatens the AMC. There's a real loss of revenue from those applicants. And then there's also the loss of revenue from having to adjust your fee schedule due to a competitor, especially versus the counterfactual where you would have just continued increasing prices like you always did. But the real threat is that other specialties will follow OBGYN's lead, and the AMC is already spending money and effort to try to deal with that threat. But it's not the only threat. There's another, which is potentially even more serious, and that's preference signaling. I've talked about preference signaling on this channel several times before, so I'm going to try to be brief. If you're unaware, preference signaling is the solution that's emerged to tame application fever. Basically, applicants in a given specialty are allowed a certain number of preference signals, and they can use those signals to show programs that they're sincerely interested in going to that program. For applicants, it's a nice way to make sure your application doesn't get filtered out without being read. For programs, it's a way of boiling down the sea of applicants to those who truly might actually come to your program. But when you give applicants a large number of signals, like those specialties that are on the left-hand side of this graph, that large number of signals functions as a soft application cap. If you want to be an orthopedic surgeon or urologist, there's nothing keeping you from applying to more than 30 programs. It's America, brother. Have at it. You can apply to 130 programs if you want. But understand this, if you apply to programs without sending a signal, they already know that they're at best your 31st favorite program, and they probably aren't going to be that interested in investing effort spending a day with you to try to convince you otherwise, especially when it's so easy to just move on to the next applicant who actually did send them a signal and might more credibly end up at their program. Now this graphic that I'm showing you here, it's for the current 2023-2024 application season. But actually, if I showed you the one from last year, what you'd see is that there were fewer specialties overall using preference signaling, and only a couple of specialties that were using big signaling with these high numbers of signals. But I promise in the coming years, there will be a continued shift to more specialties using big signaling because this is what it does for programs. This graphic is from the AAMC themselves, and it shows the drop in the mean number of applications submitted per applicant between last year's cycle and this year's application cycle. I covered this myself a few months ago in the ERAS preliminary data drop winners and losers video. But basically, highly competitive specialties like ortho and ENT and dermatology that have gone to big signaling, they've seen a drop in applications per applicant from the 80s or 90s down to the 50s. But now, big signaling is spreading beyond the highly competitive surgical subspecialties. And now, the biggest specialty of them all, the specialty that draws more applicants than any other, and that draws the greatest number of international medical graduates who disproportionately apply to a ton of programs that inflate the AMC's bottom line, that specialty may be moving to big signaling. Here's a quote from a recent journal article. The Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine recommends tiered preference signaling in internal medicine, using a total of 3 gold and 12 silver signals in the 2024-2025 recruitment season, and participation in signaling by all internal medicine programs. This would be the headshot for ERAS. Without thousands of IMGs spending thousands of dollars apiece to apply to hundreds of IM programs, ERAS revenue is going to drop precipitously. And oh yeah, the fact that at least one major specialty is leaving ERAS and others might follow, that doesn't help either. This is going to create some real problems for the AAMC. For over 2 decades now, ERAS has been their cash cow. It's funded enormous growth for the organization because profits from ERAS get reinvested into the AAMC in the form of expanded programs and higher executive salaries. And to be sure, the AAMC still has some plays they could make. They have other services they could grow. Actually, I'm quite confident that in the coming years, you're going to see a significant jump in fees for the Visiting Student Application Service, or VSAS, especially as the value of away rotations continues to increase. But still, it's hard to imagine applicants applying to hundreds of away rotations at $26 or $27 a pop like we've seen during the peak of application fever. It would also be possible for the AAMC to crank up prices for the MCAT or for AMCAS too, and they could try to rake in a little bit more money on students' way into medical school. But they would have to more than double their revenue from both the MCAT and AMCAS in order to make up for a loss of ERAS. And make no mistake, the possibility that ERAS could completely be lost, that it might simply go away in the next few years, I think that's absolutely in play. If big signaling continues to proliferate, which seems extremely likely, and multiple specialties leave ERAS, which certainly seems plausible, then the AMC may be faced with a situation in which the cost of maintaining and upgrading a legacy technology system just isn't worth it, and they might choose to wind down the whole operation. And even if that doesn't occur, the AMC is going to have to make some hard choices about which programs and services to cut. And I want to be clear, I'm not celebrating that. Some good people are going to lose their jobs, and especially in a world in which a person's ability to get health care is tied to their employment, that's not something I'm trying to toast to. But at the same time, it's very hard for me to feel sorry for the AAMC's current and previous senior leadership, because over a prolonged period of time, they made and kept making decisions that set them up for this crisis. How you let your organization get to the point where its entire business model is dependent on extracting money from desperate residency applicants really is an astounding feat of mismanagement. If previous AAMC leaders had been a little less enamored with seeing the bottom line grow and paused to reflect on whether this was really the best course for their organization to take, this whole thing could have been avoided. Now, you would have had a smaller and leaner AAMC, but you also would have had one with a cleaner mission and sturdier financial footing for a changing environment. And honestly, you might have even been able to sleep a little easier at night, knowing that your organization had provided a valuable service and charged a fair price for it, instead of pretending that you didn't see what was going on around you and sucking up as much cash as possible. And folks, that's all I've got. Thanks for listening.